What if I told you that within every champion lies a blueprint for greatness? Today we unravel the extraordinary mindset of a man who didn't just dominate opponents in the octagon, but conquered the very essence of what it means to be a champion. Join me as we delve into the mindset of George "Rush" St-Pierre, a legend in the world of mixed martial arts. What made him great wasn't just his physical prowess, but the unyielding mental fortitude that shaped his journey. From overcoming bullies at a young age to harnessing the power of fear, GSP's story is an absolute masterclass in mindset mastery. So buckle up, because today we're going to uncover the 5 key factors that transform GSP into one of the greatest fighters of all time. And guys, this isn't just a journey into his life, it's an exploration of the champion within you. Because every principle that we're going to discuss today, every mindset attribute can be directly applied into our own lives, into our own goals, as we look to unleash greatness. Welcome to ChampMind Studios. Let's get after it. All right, guys, welcome back to the channel. My name's Mitch, and this is ChampMind Studios, where we explore the winning mindset, culture, and habits from some of the most successful athletes, coaches, business owners, entrepreneurs, you name it. We figure out what makes them great from a psychological and mindset perspective, and we apply some of those attributes into our own lives, into our own goals, as we look to unleash greatness. And before I talk about the mindset of one of the most dominant and legendary fighters of all time in George St-Pierre, be sure to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, ring that notification bell, because guys, I've got some big things coming your way in 2024. Some cool interviews lined up, some big projects on the horizon, so you do not want to miss what's coming your way from ChampMind Studios in the next 12 months and beyond. And I'm super excited for today's topic because George St-Pierre is one of my personal favorite fighters of all time. In fact, when I first got into MMA back in 2004, 2005-ish, GSP was one of the first fighters that I was drawn to because, listen, as a traditional martial artist myself, I was a karate guy through and through. When I saw GSP come out to the octagon wearing the gi, really embracing those traditional core values. He was always respectful on the microphone. He was always respectful to his opponents before the fight. But then once that cage door shut, he was an absolute animal, and he was kicking everybody's ass. And I was just, as a kid, as a 15, 14-year-old kid that grew up in martial arts, that never really had a platform to showcase some of the things that I was being taught, in karate, to see somebody do that at a high level and just absolutely dominate people, it blew me away. I was like, who is this guy? So one of the first fights that I ever saw with GSP was his debut in the UFC against a guy named Karo Parisyan. And Karo Parisyan was this elite judoka, which is a judo practitioner. He specialized in throws and, getting guys to the ground in very unorthodox, unique ways. And then he would immediately wrap up a submission. He'd go for kimuras. He'd get a hold of your arm. He'd get an arm bar. And he was so aggressive with it. And at that time, he was one of the best welterweights in the world because there wasn't a lot of guys that knew how to defend his judo. I mean, today, in today's MMA, judo is not as effective. There's very few guys with judo backgrounds that are able to have success in the UFC, just because the sport has evolved so much. I'll use Ronda Rousey as an example. When she came over, there was not a lot of females at that time that knew how to defend against judo. And that's why she was just armbarring everybody, right? Karo Parisyan was very similar. And he was so aggressive. He just had this insane pace. The commentators, Joe Rogan was talking about it before the fight started. He's like, listen, Karo's going to try to get this to the ground, get a hold of George's arm, and lock up a submission, bring his arm home with him. And GSP, man, this guy, he blew me away with just how physically strong he was. Because Carl was trying to get those throws, and he got the fight to the ground a few times. In fact, right when the fight started, he grabbed a hold of George's arm, and immediately I thought it was over. I was like, all right, this is, this kid GSP. He had a cool entrance and everything, but it looks like he's about to get submitted. And Carl wasn't able to get it. He wasn't able to lock up that arm. GSP started taking control of the fight, started imposing his will in the top position. And that was kind of the first introduction to who would then become one of the most dominant champions in welterweight history. So let's talk about what makes this guy great, what made him great. And if we're talking about those physical attributes, of course, you got to talk about his elite level striking. I mean, he came from a Kyokushin karate background, eventually learned boxing, learned kickboxing, Muay Thai, all the elements of striking, right, and tied it together. He was one of the most physically imposing and explosive wrestlers in the division, which was pretty unique at the time because he didn't come from a traditional wrestling background. He started training in wrestling after getting into MMA, and he sought out the Canadian national wrestling team, training with those guys, and became an absolute beast with his takedowns and top control. He was also an elite Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner, eventually became a BJJ black belt. So he had it all. He had all of the physical attributes on top of just raw athleticism that you just can't teach. And he combined all of that together, and physically speaking, he had every single aspect you could want from a fighter. But you take out his mind, if you take out the mind of GSP, even with all of those physical attributes, I do not think he attains any modicum of success without that mindset. Now, at the start of this video, I alluded to 5 key principles within the mindset of GSP that made him the best in the world. And we're going to start with number 1, and that is his resiliency. And that's resiliency that he developed at a young age. So recently I had the opportunity of reading his book, his autobiography, The Way of the Fight. And in that book, he starts out talking about his childhood. And I was really interested to learn about how he was bullied as a kid. He talked about that before. I mean, he discussed that in previous interviews. But he went more in detail in this book and how, getting bullied on the playground led to him finding martial arts. It led to him seeking out Christophe Mado, who was one of the top kickboxers in Montreal at the time. And it really fascinated me because I came from a similar upbringing. I was bullied in school, in kindergarten. Kids are cruel, man. And I was I was picked on relentlessly at 4 years old, to the point where I was coming home from kindergarten with black eyes, with rocks up my nose because the kids would pin me down and shove rocks up my nose. And my parents were just like, all right, enough is enough. Like, we need to have this kid learn how to defend himself. And they enrolled me in self-defense lessons and Shaolin Kempo karate. And I fell in love with martial arts and learned how to stand up for myself, learn self-confidence, discipline, all those things. Now, keep in mind, this was the early 90s, so MMA wasn't as popular and prevalent as it is now. There wasn't a ton of MMA gyms out there, at least not in my local area, and at least not for a 4-year-old kid for that matter. Same with BJJ. There wasn't a lot of Brazilian jiu-jitsu schools out there either, so these days, you got these kids, they're coming right out of the womb, and they're learning MMA, they're learning the ground game, they're training in boxing, kickboxing. Back in the early 90s, it was pretty much karate, and that was it. And I'm not trying to put down karate. I'll always say that karate was my first love. I learned how to believe in myself. I developed self-discipline, respect, all of those essential skills that helped me become the man that I am today. I credit that to karate. And my instructors were amazing. I had a great team of people around me, and I loved my childhood in traditional martial arts. But having said that, it is not the most effective style for learning how to defend yourself on the street, and it's certainly not the most effective style for if you're trying to transition into a career into MMA. With that being said, though, without karate, I would have continued to get bullied and I would have never learned how to stand up for myself. So I think that's a similar story that a lot of martial artists had back then, and GSP was similar. And so George talked about that openly in his book, and he credited, those early encounters dealing with bullies and those early situations and learning how to stand up for himself as one of the reasons why he ended up becoming as great and as successful as he ended up becoming. And that carried through to his fight career too, because think back on all those times when he had, guys like Josh Koscheck, Nick Diaz, Dan Hardy, some of these guys that were trying to rile George up, talk trash, get inside of his head, and play those mind games with George. And that never fazed him, not one bit. I mean, he was always cool, calm, and collected leading up to the fight, kept his composure mentally, and never broke. Never allowed his opponents to break him mentally, at least in those situations. And that's not easy to do, right? I mean, listen, there are difficult people in our day-to-day lives all around us 24/7, regardless of how old we are. Bullies are bullies, and bullies are very weak-minded people. They are using their own issues, their own, insecurities, and reflecting that outward on other people. And that's all it is. But it's real tempting when you're in those situations to get, caught up in it, to get, to allow these people to get a reaction and a rise out of you. And George, he learned very early on that gets you nowhere. It really doesn't. And this is something that I can attest to myself. And I'm not perfect. I talked about this in a previous video where I talked about Alexander Volkanovski's mindset, because he's similar to George. He's able to keep his composure very well when dealing with trash talkers and bullies and things like that. I tend to, sometimes I allow the anger to get the better of me. Not always, but sometimes I allow myself to get caught up in it, and then I start, going back at the other person, and it's just wasted energy, and it's just, it's not going to get you anywhere. You're just exhausting yourself. Whereas if you sit back and you realize and you tell yourself, like, okay, there's a reason why this person is doing this, and it's not because of me. It's not because, they think they're better than me or whatever, or any of that stuff. Like, it has everything to do with their own insecurities that they're reflecting on you, and they feel like they have to resort to these tactics in order to get an advantage over you, in order to try to one-up you. And when you realize that, and when you sit back and it becomes crystal clear to you what they're doing, you can take a deep breath, you can keep your composure, and you can just smile at them. And I'll tell you, man, when you smile at a bully, oh my God, it's like you are just cutting a knife through their heart. When they see that they can't get a reaction out of you, when they see that they can't beat you with those tactics, they got nothing else. They have nothing else left. And a perfect example of that was when George coached The Ultimate Fighter Season 12 against rival Josh Koscheck. And, you talk about bullies and just complete utter jackasses. I mean, look no further than a guy like Josh Koscheck. Some of you newer fans might not be familiar with that name, but those of us who were watching the sport way back in the day remember just what an absolute dick this guy was. He's a good fighter, don't get me wrong. He was a perennial contender in that welterweight division. He was an NCAA All-American. But he was that typical jock that you dealt with in high school that just walked around with his chest out and just picked on everybody that he felt was beneath him, and just had no sense of respect for anything, and was just an entitled prick. So anyway, Koscheck and GSP fought once before coaching the Tough Show against each other. And the first time they fought, it was fairly competitive. I mean, George, he definitely won the decision. But Koscheck was, he made it competitive enough. He took George down, I think, twice in that fight, which was something that nobody else up to that point and after that was able to do against him. And before their rematch, you got to think, this was GSP in the prime of his title run, his second title run as welterweight champion, and he was dominating everybody. I mean, he had run through the division totally cleaned the division out, and was now going back and running through it again. And the UFC were looking for viable contenders. I mean, George was so dominant to the point where fans were starting to say that His style was boring because he was so much better than his opponents. They were so one-sided that nobody was really able to compete with him. So you had all these MMA analysts at the time and the UFC marketing machine getting behind Josh Koscheck, trying to sell this narrative that he's the toughest fight for George in the division. He's got that wrestling base to really give George some problems. The reality was he never really had much of a chance. GSP was light years better than him, and at that point, by the time they were getting ready to rematch each other in 2010 or 11, I think it was 2010, GSP was a much better fighter than he was the first time he fought Josh. And Josh knew that, right? He knew that he had to rely on playing mind games to get inside of George's head and hope that it threw him off his rhythm by the time they locked into the octagon. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing inherently wrong with that. I mean, listen, Muhammad Ali played mind games. Mike Tyson, to a certain extent, played mind games. Conor McGregor played mind games. And they all worked. It worked to their advantage. They got inside their opponents' heads. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the fact that Koscheck, his insults were like fourth grade level. I mean, the guy was he wasn't very intelligent, and his attempts at trying to trash talk his opponents just came across like a spoiled little brat. And, it was smart. I mean, he made himself hateable. He was a top, what you would call heel villain in the UFC at the time. So can't fault him for that. But it's just that's all he had. And it was able to work sometimes. I mean, you look back, he fought this guy, Paul Daly, and he completely got inside Daly's head to the point where after winning a decision, Paul Daly sucker punched him and ended up getting banned from the UFC after that, which is kind of funny if you think about it, and ironic, because stuff like that does not get people banned today, which is crazy to me. But you look at how big the sport is. Back then, it was still trying to get accepted by the general population. But these days, it's like these guys start brawling. You got Sean Strickland and Dricus du Plessis brawled each other in the crowd, and they're still headlining a pay-per-view next month. So, in any case, that's a tale for a different story. But going back to GSP and Koscheck, right? So they go to Coach Tough, and the whole show, Koscheck is just trying to just throw verbal jabs at George. He's just saying the dumbest, most obnoxious things, trying to piss this guy off, trying to, get him off balance. And it didn't work at all. And instead, George just kind of laughed it off, and he would respond in these really witty ways to make Josh look like an even bigger fool than he was. And it was just, it was so satisfying to watch because at the end of it, I mean, you could tell Josh had nothing for him. They spent 12 weeks coaching the show against each other, and Josh Koscheck, he didn't get inside of George's head once, and he came out of that show looking like a complete fool. They had their rematch. George totally dominated him, just destroyed him with a beautiful jab. And that was pretty much all he needed to totally batter and butcher Josh Koscheck's face, was just a beautifully timed jab. So, that was George. His whole mindset against dealing with bullies, dealing with these trash talkers. He never let it get to him, and he used it against them because Koscheck looked timid. He looked slow. He knew he had nothing for George in that fight, especially when that first takedown attempt was stuffed. He was over and done with. So listen, we all have these people that we deal with in our lives at time to time. These people that are just difficult to deal with and are either intentionally or unintentionally trying to get inside of our heads. Instead of letting them rile us up, instead of letting them get a reaction out of us, let's take a book out of the George St-Pierre playbook and dust it off our shoulders, smile at them, and just do our thing and just whoop ass. Now on to the second aspect of GSP's mindset that I want to talk about. He wasn't interested in being champion. He wasn't. He was obsessed with being champion. He was obsessed with being the absolute best fighter in the world. Guys, I talked about this in previous videos. You need to be obsessed with whatever it is you are looking to accomplish in life, because if you are not obsessed with it, it's not going to happen. Tim Grover talks about this. Tim Grover was a mental health coach that worked with some of the best NBA players of all time. He worked with Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade. And he wrote a ton of books about his experiences, working with those athletes. And he said the common theme with all of them was their obsession to be great. You have to have an obsession. You have to have a burning desire, a burning passion deep inside of yourself to get after it. And that's what Georges St-Pierre had that a lot of guys didn't. A lot of guys talk about wanting to be great. A lot of guys talk about, I want to be UFC champion, but they don't put the work in. They don't put the obsession in that Georges St-Pierre had at the time. And there's so much power in that, because what you're doing when you become totally engulfed in the goal is that you're sending the message to your subconscious. You're telling your subconscious mind to get to work. Think about this, guys. This is the power of the subconscious, right? Think about when you walk. Do you consciously think about walking? Do you consciously think about taking steps? Or is it your subconscious going to work for you, getting you to where you want to go? When you were a baby, you had to consciously learn how to walk, right? And then eventually it was programmed into you. You have to become obsessed, because that obsession is going to trigger that subconscious. It's going to trigger the formula in your subconscious brain to push you towards whatever you want to get after in life. People talk about manifestation. That's what manifestation is. I mean, it really is. People act like manifestation is this magic pill. You got a magic lamp and the genie comes out of it, grants you 3 wishes. Really, the genie is your subconscious brain. You have to become obsessed with whatever you want in life, and that's what Georges St-Pierre was. He worked with the best trainers in the world. He sought out the best coaches in the world. If there was something he wasn't good at, he became obsessed with getting so good at it that nobody could touch him in it. Think about wrestling. I mentioned it at the start of the video. GSP didn't wrestle in high school. He didn't wrestle in college. So how was it that he was able to become the best wrestler in the welterweight division? Better than these guys that wrestled at a collegiate level. He was obsessed. Keyword obsessed. Are you obsessed? Ask yourself that right now. You might want something in life. You might want that promotion. You might want to lose 50 pounds. You might want to start that business. Want. How bad do you want it, guys? How bad do you want it? Are you willing to become obsessed with it? Are you willing to make the necessary sacrifices to get up every single day and get after it? Because that's what Georges St-Pierre did, and that's why he was a dominant world champion. That's why he defended the title 9 times. That's why he won both the welterweight and middleweight title, which is something not a lot of fighters can say. How bad do you want it? And that leads me into the third aspect of GSP's mindset, and that is his insane self-discipline. And I was watching an interview with Andrei Arlovsky recently, because he's fighting on this UFC Vegas 84 card, right? And I forget the name of the guy that interviewed him, but he was asking him about how he's been able to stay active for so many years, right? And Arlovsky brought up discipline, and he said discipline is reminding yourself of where you want to go. And I think that's a perfect definition of it, right? And GSP, he embraced discipline in every single aspect. It totally, we talked about that obsession that he had. You can't truly be obsessed with your goals without discipline, because it's easy to be motivated, right? But you lose motivation quick. Motivation will only get you so far. Discipline keeps you going on the days where you don't want to train, on the days where you don't want to get after your goals, and you just want to have those lazy days and just lay back and waste your time, scroll through your iPhone. Without discipline, the obsession cannot become a reality. So GSP was extraordinarily disciplined, and that started, I think, with his background in traditional martial arts as a young kid. There's power in that. There's power in, and I can talk about that because I started in martial arts when I was 4 years old myself. You're built differently when you are instilled with these values very young, very early on, because again, it all goes into your subconscious. Now, I'm not as disciplined as Georges St-Pierre. I'm working towards that. Can definitely get better at it. But GSP was an absolute monster when it came to self-discipline. There was very few things that could steer him off track. Every once in a while he would hang out, he'd party, he'd drink a few, he'd get a few drinks in him. Never did drugs though, never really messed around with any of that stuff. And he was, for the most part, he was so focused on where he was going that it took a lot to throw him off track, if ever. You know what I mean? I mean, he was just so locked in and so dialed in that he was just unbreakable. And I want to say something real quick, because when we talk about discipline, one of the most common reasons for failure is we'll fall off the wagon once and then we're done, right? Because in our minds, we tend to think, okay, we've fallen off track. We didn't do what we were supposed to do, and we just keep doing it, right? But discipline is not perfection. You know what I mean? Nobody's perfect. No human being on earth is perfect. But discipline is having the mental fortitude to get back up on the horse when you've fallen off. Because you're going to have days like that. You're going to have days where you don't get up early enough to train, right? You don't go to the gym because X, Y, and Z, right? You have a day where it's just work is crazy and you're not able to get after your goals, and it's going to happen. It's human nature. But you have to have the mental fortitude to say, you know what? Tomorrow is a new day. And slowly but surely, you're going to build discipline. You're going to get to the point where those days where you have those, those moments of, those moments where you're failing, you're not getting after your goals, they're going to be few and far between. And that's how discipline is built. The third aspect of GSP's mindset that I want to talk about is his unbelievable ability to learn from failure. And he didn't fail often, because out of 28 professional fights, the guy only lost twice. And what I found remarkable about those two losses was he didn't lose those fights because he was the worst fighter between the two guys in the octagon, right? He didn't lose because of physical ability, because of skill set. He lost those fights, both of those fights, to Matt Hughes and Matt Serra for mental reasons. And I'm going to discuss each of them separately. So let's talk about that Matt Hughes fight, right? This was GSP's first time fighting for the UFC title against a guy that he idolized in Matt Hughes. And you have to remember that back in the day, Matt Hughes was the most dominant welterweight on the planet. I mean, he was picking everybody up, slamming them on their head, making it look easy. He looked untouchable for a very long period of time. When George St-Pierre fought him for the first time, he couldn't even make eye contact with him because he looked up to Matt Hughes that much. And it was to the point where he didn't believe in himself. He didn't think he could beat Matt Hughes. And when you don't believe you can win, you've already lost. You've already lost before the fight even starts. And that's what happened. He learned from that. He took that loss in stride, learned where he came up short. And in the rematch, he went after Matt Hughes. He did not give a shit about who this guy was. All the respect that he had for him in the first fight went out the window. All he saw was a guy that was in his way of becoming a UFC champion. He went out there and smashed Matt Hughes. Totally dominated him. Then he fought Matt Serra. And this one was a little bit different. And listen, I'm a huge Matt Serra fan. Matt Serra was one of those guys that I could relate to. He came from the same hometown as me. We're both from Long Island, New York. We're both, short Italian guys, short, stocky Italian guys that love to eat pasta. And Matt Serra was a huge underdog in that fight with GSP. He had just come off the win over Chris Lytle to win the Ultimate Fighter Season 4. It was a very uninspired win. I mean, he won the decision, but it was a pretty boring fight, and he just kind of barely beat him, right, to get that title shot. Nobody believed that Matt Serra had a chance against GSP. GSP heard that. GSP read all of those articles, listened to all of those interviews. Everybody's saying that this was going to be an easy fight for him. This is going to be a walk in the park. He believed that. And he barely trained for this fight. He saw Matt Serra as, listen, a walk in the park. And that was a mistake. You cannot, I don't care who the opponent is, you cannot view anybody that competes in that octagon in the UFC at the highest level in the sport as a walk in the park. Nobody is. Nobody. But on that night, GSP viewed Matt Serra as a cakewalk. He certainly wasn't expecting Serra to knock him out. I mean, if anything, he thought maybe, listen, maybe I don't take this guy down. Because Matt Serra was a high-level black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So George's whole game plan was, let me just keep it standing. I'm not going to take this guy down. But he can't hang with me on the feet. I'm a much better striker. Guess what? Matt Serra knocked him the fuck out in the first round, stole his title, and became UFC welterweight champion. One of the biggest underdog upsets in UFC history. Imagine what that did to GSP mentally. That could screw with somebody, and that could, listen, there's different ways you can respond to that, right? The first way is you listen to the voices in your head that are telling you, I'm not good enough. I'm not as good as I thought I was. I allowed this guy who was lesser skilled than me to knock my block off. What am I doing? What am I doing? And that can haunt you. And that could cause you to go downward and continue to spiral until, you're never the same. Or you can do what George St-Pierre did and recognize that, there is something mentally wrong with me right now. My mindset's not right. And I don't know how to fix it. So rather than dwell on the negative situation, dwell on what just happened to me, let me reach out to a professional. Let me reach out to a sports psychologist. That's what GSP did. And that leads me to the fourth aspect of his game, of his mindset that made him one of the greatest of all time, was his ability to seek help from others. Because seeking help, a lot of times we think, if we ask for help, that's a sign of weakness, right? I don't need help. I don't need anybody to help me. I can do this all on my own. I can figure this out. And we think that's a sign of strength to do that. But it's not. It's a sign of strength to ask people for help. And that's what George St-Pierre did. And he reached out to a sports psychologist, and it totally changed his life. George St-Pierre, after that Matt Serra knockout, became an absolute savage, an absolute animal. Nobody ever came close to beating George St-Pierre after that Matt Serra fight, except for the Johnny Hendricks fight. But listen, Johnny Hendricks I like Johnny Hendricks, but he was on some performance enhancing drugs, let's be honest. And GSP retired after that fight. He still won. He won a decision, arguable, questionable decision. But outside of that, nobody touched GSP after that Matt Serra fight. And there's a reason for that. Because it awoken something inside of him. It awoken a monster. You are watching this right now, and I guarantee you, if you clicked on this video, maybe you clicked on it because you're a George St-Pierre fan and you thought it was a cool thumbnail. Maybe you wanted to see what this video was all about. But maybe you clicked on this video because you were looking for some inspiration. Maybe you clicked on this video because something's going on in your life and you don't know how to respond to it. You're going through failure right now. You're going through adversity. Let me ask you this question. Have you ever asked anybody for help? Are you afraid to ask somebody for help? Guys, it's not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of weakness. GSP had the best coaches in the world. He started training with guys like Firas Zahabi, Greg Jackson, some of the most elite and brilliant technical masterpieces in the game. He was untouchable because he asked for help. Now, the fifth and final aspect of GSP's mindset that made him the most dominant welterweight champion of all time, one of the greatest fighters of all time, was his ability to harness fear and admit fear. Fear's real. You can't run away from it. You can sit there, you can deny that you're not afraid. Nothing faces you. You're not afraid of anything. Bullshit. Bullshit, folks. We all experience fear. Especially mixed martial arts fighters. I mean, listen, they got to fight inside of an octagon. They get inside of a cage, a locked cage, and have to fight another human being for 15 or 25 minutes until the referee calls it or the time's up. That's a very, very scary thought, regardless of how tough you are. GSP was afraid of every single opponent he fought, but he knew how to harness that fear and have those positive conversations in his mind to trigger the mind to tell his subconscious that, you know what? I don't care. Yeah, I'm afraid, but I know I can beat this guy. I know I can beat this guy. There's a war going on inside of our minds every single day. We have something like, 200,000 thoughts every single day. Some positive, some negative. We tend to believe the negative. We tend to agree with the negative. Whenever the positive comes into our mind, whenever we tell ourselves, I can win, I can do this, it's quickly drowned out by the voice of fear. And we disguise fear. We give fear a different name. We give fear the name of realism. I'm a realist. If you ask somebody right now, how will they describe themselves? How would they describe themselves in their profession? Do they think they're one of the best in the world? Or do they think that they're barely skating by? However they answer that question is true, because that's who they are. What you tell yourself, what you speak out loud, tends to come to fruition, tends to become reality. Because the words that you say out loud, your subconscious is listening to it. And your subconscious is going to go to work to make whatever you say out loud and whatever you say in your brain come to life. That's what manifestation is. Like I said, you hear these people talk about manifestation. Oh, I manifested that. I manifested it. I wished it into existence. Manifestation is real. It's very, very real. Conor McGregor manifested his career. George St-Pierre absolutely manifested his career. But it wasn't magic. It wasn't, it wasn't just asking the universe for something and coming to life. This was an obsession, an unrelentless belief, and a daily attack on this goal. But they always believed. They always believed. And what you believe tends to become true. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the mindset that made George Rush St-Pierre one of the most dominant fighters in the history of mixed martial arts. Guys, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button. I got a lot of things coming your way in 2024 and beyond that. We're taking over. We're taking over YouTube. Listen, when I talk about an obsession for being great, you need to have an obsession. You need to be obsessed with your goals. I am obsessed with becoming the #1 platform to inspire millions of people. Because I believe in human potential. I believe in you. I believe in me. I believe in every single person on this planet. And if nobody has told you today, you are fucking awesome. You're amazing. You are destined for greatness. Let's unleash that greatness. Let's get after it. Have a great night, folks. Boom!